Hello everyone, we continue to study the Colosseum. This is the second part of the film dedicated to the Colosseum. In the first part we touched on many aspects of both the history and the construction of the Colosseum, how it was destroyed during the War of the Gods, then restored by the Romans, how it was completed and by whom it was completed. And in this part we will finally figure out why it was needed and how it at least looked initially. So, for a long time now there has been an assumption that some kind of water battles were once held in the arena, mixed with gladiator fights, but it's very difficult to believe in that. Because to install this arena with all its lifting mechanisms and supporting elements, and then quickly dismantle it and fill this entire volume with water, and somehow drag entire ships there, and somehow again they had to be placed there. I apologize, but this is somehow very implausible. From the realm of fantasy. Only in films, of course, it's all easy to do. In reality, no one will ever do this, and no one has ever done it. Even guides don't consider this version as probable, and don't tell tourists about it. But in fact, there is a canal system there, which brings water from different sources to the Colosseum. But what was this canal system used for? Even when we go into the basement, we see that there is still water there, which is now being drained so that it doesn't flood this entire pit. So if we remove this entire arena, remove all this stone supporting the structure and simply let the water in there, what do we see? It turns out to be a huge pool with water, exactly a pool. Now we have entire arenas pools where people organize Olympics, swimming races. In essence, it was the same thing. A huge arena, a huge pool, where there was running water and it was always fresh there. And it seems that the Colosseum was originally built for this purpose. It was just a huge water arena where the gods probably bathed, swam and rested. Later, when the Colosseum was already destroyed, apparently the integrity of this pit, its water resistance was broken, so the water began to drain. Then people find this place. We can see that earlier, perhaps, the entrance and the first floor were a little different, because if you go down into the donjon of the Colosseum, we can see that the Romans put blocks here, installed the first level of the first floor in such supports. We can see that they didn't even know how to lay this travertine correctly. Because unlike that the Romans built after, the entire Colosseum had built correctly. Travertine has natural cavities, and these cavities must be located strictly horizontally in the same position in which this stone is located in the quarries. That is, this is how it withstands the load correctly. If you put it vertically, it will no longer work correctly. It will crumble along these cracks and collapse. Of course, Romans didn't know this and place it anyhow. In general, they made supports for the first floor where people are walking now. And probably everything was different here, because we see that these supporting elements of the arch don't go down and rise about 15 meters high, where the first floor was already, and before there was probably water flowed here. Well, and of course the Colosseum itself looked completely different inside. We've already touched on the topic of its ceilings, what they were like originally, and this beauty had been stolen long time ago because it all apparently crumbled after that powerful explosion. Well, the Romans were already restoring as best they could. In one place I did find Roman ceilings, and of course this is not a high quality job. So what did the Colosseum originally look like? All the walls were decorated with marble. Bare travertine was probably not even visible anywhere, and this applies to both the internal and external walls. But as we know, the gods didn't build from bricks. Therefore, all these walls that are now laid out with bricks, and these are some partitions that go from the arches inward and the stands that surround the arena. They weren't there originally. Initially, we see that only a few columns survived there. And not this, but this. They are square with capitals that widen upwards. Apparently, there were columns here initially, not tribunes. Or perhaps there were no tribunes at all, or they were located only at the top, since we see that all these tribunes, absolutely all of them, are made of bricks and already filled inside with so-called Roman concrete. After all, we will not find a single tribune anywhere that would be made of travertine. Travertine, which is the basis of this entire structure and which is laid out using a technology unknown to us. I repeat, mortarless, gapless, and with the use of metal embedded parts. Also, in the Colosseum, we can see fragments of columns everywhere, scattered everywhere, simply piled up against the walls or gathered in heaps, all broken. Who broke them and who made them? That's a good question. Where did they actually stand? Because what restorers and archaeologists paint the picture of what the Colosseum originally was seems unlikely, because nowhere in any place, not a single column stand in the way historians assume, and all these columns are torn to pieces, crushed. I assume that these columns were destroyed at the moment of the very explosion that destroyed the southern part of the arch and left a gap in the third arch from the south, which basically survived and was then built up with bricks in the 19th century. So the Romans, of course, wanted to use these columns somehow, but they were all broken, so apparently they simply stuck them aside. They didn't want to drag such a mess anywhere. Perhaps they broke them up little by little into building material. And in addition, the Colosseum has a bunch of such capitals placed everywhere. But as we know from Greece, people could simply put these capitals up as decorations, or they were placed on some kind of pedestals. However, we see that many of these capitals are of absolutely low quality, and they are found mixed with simply ideal examples, where neither a chisel nor any other tool that possessed them is visible. If we eventually remove all these bricks, all these stands that people put up, and imagine that the columns stood around the arena, and there were apparently entire colonnades, possibly covered, and the gods apparently rested there. There were also no stands, but apparently just tracers that overlooked the arena with balconies. There were also columns there, decorating the ends of the terraces. And just like many other structures in Greece, it was simply a large entertainment complex where the gods probably rested and regained their strength. And this is how it probably looked like. Well, as for the famous Roman concrete, I didn't find anything surprising about it. It's found everywhere in the Colosseum, but we see it's just a mortar into which stones of different sizes were added. It's absolutely impossible to call it concrete. As a builder, I don't understand at all how it could be called concrete. Well, and a lot of bricks was already used by the Romans. In fact, bricks was their main building material used in Rome itself. Therefore, it's difficult for me to understand why all the buildings that are somehow similar to the Colosseum are attributed to the Romans, since the Romans themselves, the inhabitants of the city of Rome, they used bricks. They didn't have a lot of bricks, though. They mainly used bricks as permanent formwork, into which mortar mixed with stones was later placed. That is the so-called Roman concrete, and therefore what is called Roman walk in other places raises great doubts about the involvement of the Romans. In general, it seems to me, and I show this in my videos, that we understand history completely incorrectly. It seems that there was no Roman Empire at all. Most likely there were just cities that didn't even have states. They traded with each other, had a similar culture like we have now, and each part even had some of its own technologies. But there was a common style of this era. They all tried to make their buildings resemble to the buildings of the gods, and each part of the world has its own building material from which they tried to do this. And thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel to see new discoveries.